It's a sweltering summer evening in 1997, the kind where the Missouri humidity clings to your skin like a second layer of regret. In a modest, split-level home on the outskirts of Kansas City, 8-year-old Ethan Hargrove sits cross-legged on the faded green carpet of his bedroom, his small fingers tracing invisible patterns on the window pane streaked with fingerprints and the ghosts of rainstorms past. The room is a shrine to isolation, walls plastered with yellowed star charts, shelves sagging under the weight of dog-eared astronomy books far too advanced for a child his age, and a single nightlight casting erratic shadows that dance like specters across the ceiling. Ethan's mother, Laura, a weary nurse in her mid-30s with calloused hands from endless shifts at Truman Medical Center, pauses in the doorway, her heart twisting at the sight of her son. He's rocking gently, humming a tuneless melody that sounds like the wind through cracked cornfields, his wide blue eyes fixed on the darkening sky outside. Autism has always made Ethan a world unto himself, a boy who speaks in echoes and fragments, who deciphers the stars better than he does the emotions flickering across his mother's face. But tonight, as the cicadas scream their symphony of impending doom, Ethan turns to her, not with his usual vacant stare, but with a clarity that pierces the dim light like a knife. 13 shadows, he whispers, his voice a fragile thread barely audible over the hum of the old box fan. They come for the lights, one by one, starting with the baker on Elm. Laura freezes, chalking it up to one of his episodes, those cryptic bursts where he recites license plates from cars 3 blocks away, or predicts the exact minute a storm will break. She ruffles his sandy hair, forces a smile that doesn't reach her eyes, and murmurs, "Time for bed, little stargazer. Dreams are safer than shadows." But as she closes the door, a chill slithers down her spine, unbidden and unnatural, because in that moment, Ethan's words aren't just words, they're a harbinger, a fracture in the fabric of the ordinary, pulling her into a vortex of fear that no mother's love can mend. From that single, shattering utterance, a cascade of dread unfurls, gripping your chest like icy fingers, whispering doubts into the quiet corners of your mind. Fear, yes, the primal kind that makes you glance over your shoulder at every rustle in the bushes, every flicker of headlights on an empty street. But woven into it is intrigue, that magnetic pull toward the abyss, the seductive question of what lies beyond the veil of the everyday. Empathy surges too, for a boy trapped in a mind that sees too much, feels too deeply, yet communicates in riddles that no one dares to solve. And horror? Oh, it simmers beneath, bubbling up like bile. Because what if this isn't madness but something darker? A glimpse into the machinery of fate, where the human psyche bends and breaks under the weight of truths it's not meant to bear. Suspense coils tight, leaving you breathless, heart pounding in rhythm with the ticking clock of inevitability. You've stepped into a dark tunnel now, one lined with the echoes of screams yet to come, where the air grows thicker with each step, heavy with the scent of impending tragedy. What you uncover here will scar you, not with visible wounds, but with the kind that fester in the soul, reshaping how you view the fragile scaffolding of sanity, the capricious dance of justice in a world that punishes the innocent, and the razor-thin line separating your own safety from the chaos lurking just beyond your locked doors. Lurking behind Ethan's innocent prophecy is a secret so profound, so perversely twisted that it defies the neat boxes we build for evil, psychiatric labels, courtroom verdicts, whispered rumors, and church pews. Few know it even now, decades later, because to acknowledge it would mean confronting the unimaginable, that the mind of a child fractured by autism might not just predict death but summon it, like a conductor wielding a baton over a symphony of slaughter. What if those 13 shadows aren't random victims of a killer's whim, but threads in a tapestry woven by Ethan's subconscious, pulling the strings of a monster who walks among them? And the most chilling question of all, was Ethan warning them, or inviting the darkness in? These enigmas hang in the air like smoke from a dying fire, unresolved, taunting you to press on, to chase the answers through the labyrinth of lies and loss that follows. Only by journeying to the end will you grasp the full, grotesque revelation, the one that shatters the illusion of control, leaving you to wonder if your own unspoken fears could one day echo in the voice of someone you love. This case, the autistic boy who predicted 13 deaths, lays bare the fragility of morality, that gossamer thread we pretend is steel, easily snapped by the unpredictable tempests of the human mind. It reminds us how swiftly the ordinary can curdle into the obscene, how a child's innocence can become the lens through which we witness the unraveling of society itself. In Ethan's story, we see our own vulnerabilities reflected back. Parents who fight invisible battles, communities that turn blind eyes to the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, and the eternal dance with evil that leaves no one unscathed. Anyone, no matter how fortified their world, can find themselves adrift in that same sea of shadows, where empathy collides with terror, and the line between protector and prey blurs into oblivion. Now, in this moment of shared unease, let's forge a connection across the screen. You and I, voyagers into the forbidden. If this glimpse into Ethan's world has stirred something primal within you, hit that like button right now. Not just as a gesture, but as a beacon, illuminating these hidden horrors so others can stumble upon them in the dead of night, when curiosity gnaws like hunger. And in the comments below, type these exact words: "I'm ready to discover the truth about this story." Say it like a vow, a key turning in the lock of the unknown, binding you to the unfolding nightmare. By doing so, you're not alone anymore. You're threading yourself into a tapestry of souls, brave, restless seekers who crave the raw, unfiltered pulse of mysteries that polite society buries deep. We become a silent alliance, whispering secrets in the dark, piecing together the puzzles that keep the rest awake with shallow breaths. You're already one of us, daring to peer where others avert their gaze. Thank you for your courage, for your hunger for truth, for choosing to stand at the edge with me. Together, we're the guardians of the untold, the ones who refuse to let these stories fade into forgotten footnotes. Prepare yourself, because what comes next contains a key revelation that will forever change the way you see the human mind. A descent into obsession, murder, and a boy's fractured visions that blur the boundary between curse and clairvoyance, leaving you forever altered. It's July 14th, 1997, and the Kansas City sun blazes with a vengeance, turning the asphalt on Elm Street into a shimmering mirage of heat. The street, a quiet artery of the working-class suburb of Raytown, hums with the rhythm of ordinary life. Lawnmowers buzzing, kids on bikes weaving through sprinklers, the faint clatter of dishes from open kitchen windows. At the corner where Elm meets 53rd sits Hargrove's Bakery, a family-run staple since the 1960s, its faded red awning promising fresh bread daily in peeling gold letters. Inside, Thomas Hargrove, no relation to Ethan's family, just a cruel twist of coincidence, kneads dough with hands gnarled from decades of work, his apron dusted with flour like a second skin. At 62, Thomas is a fixture in Raytown, a man whose warm chuckle and free cookies for kids have made him a neighborhood grandfather. But today, as the clock ticks toward 6:17 p.m., an uneasy stillness settles over the bakery like the air before a storm. The bell above the door doesn't jingle. The usual after-work crowd hasn't trickled in. Thomas wipes sweat from his brow, glancing at the empty shop, unaware that he's already marked, chosen by a force he cannot name, one that Ethan, miles away, saw in the patterns of his stars. At dusk, when the sky bruises purple and the streetlights flicker on, a delivery truck pulls into the alley behind the bakery. Its driver, a wiry man in his 30s with a crooked nose and eyes that dart like a cornered animal's, steps out, his boots crunching on gravel. He's no stranger to Raytown, though he keeps to its edges. Ray Carver, a drifter who does odd jobs, a man whose name locals barely register. He carries a canvas bag, heavy with something other than the usual flour sacks. Inside, Thomas is locking the cash register, humming an old Sinatra tune, oblivious to the shadow slipping through the back door. The attack is swift, brutal, and silent. A single blow to the temple with a lead pipe and Thomas crumples, his skull cracking against the tile floor. Blood pools beneath him, mingling with the flour dust, turning it to a grotesque paste. Ray works quickly, his movements mechanical, almost ritualistic, as he drags Thomas's body to the walk-in freezer, propping it against a stack of frozen dough. He leaves no fingerprints, no trace, only a single deliberate smear of blood on the freezer door, shaped like a crude crescent moon. By the time the first customer arrives the next morning, Thomas Hargrove is a ghost, his bakery a tomb, and the crescent moon a silent signature that no one yet understands. Across town, in the Hargrove household, Ethan's household, Laura wakes to a scream that isn't her own. It's Ethan, thrashing in his bed, his small body slick with sweat, his voice a jagged wail. The baker's light went out. The first shadow took it. Laura rushes to him, her heart hammering, wrapping her arms around his trembling frame. His eyes are wild, unseeing as he mutters about the man with the broken face and the moon that bleeds. She soothes him, chalking it up to a nightmare. But the radio crackles to life in the kitchen as she makes coffee. And the news hits like a sledgehammer. Thomas Hargrove, beloved baker, found dead in his shop, bludgeoned. No suspects, no motive. Laura's mug slips from her hands, shattering on the linoleum. Ethan's words from the night before claw at her mind, the baker on Elm, and a sickening dread coils in her gut. She glances at her son, now calm, sketching constellations on a napkin with eerie precision, and wonders if his mind, so often a locked vault, holds something more than riddles. Was it a coincidence, a fluke, or did her boy see something no one else could? A glimpse into a darkness that's only beginning to unfold. The news ripples through Raytown like a stone through still water. At the local diner, gossip swirls over greasy plates of eggs and bacon. Heard it was a robbery gone wrong, mutters a trucker, but the police find no money missing. Maybe a grudge, suggests a waitress, but Thomas had no enemies, only friends. The community mourns, leaving flowers and handwritten notes outside the bakery's shuttered windows, but beneath the grief lies a growing unease. Raytown feels different now. Its edges sharper, its shadows longer. At the police station, Detective Sarah Klein, a 38-year-old transplant from St. Louis with a knack for untangling impossible cases, pores over the crime scene photos. The crescent moon smear nags at her, a taunt, a clue, a signature. She's seen killers leave marks before, but this feels personal, deliberate, like a message written in a language she can't yet read. Her partner, Officer Mike Doherty, a gruff veteran who trusts his gut over evidence, dismisses it as some punk's idea of art. But Sarah isn't so sure. Something about the precision of the kill, the absence of chaos, whispers of a mind that plans, that savors. Back at home, Ethan's behavior grows stranger. He spends hours at his window staring at the stars, whispering numbers and names under his breath. Names Laura doesn't recognize, names that make her skin prickle. Mary next, he murmurs one night, clutching a crumpled star chart. Mary by the water. Laura, exhausted from double shifts and the weight of her son's unraveling, tries to dismiss it, but the fear is relentless now, burrowing deeper with every passing day. She doesn't know that across town, Mary Kessler, a 45-year-old librarian who walks her dog by the Little Blue River every evening, is already being watched. Ray Carver, hidden in the dusk, his crooked nose catching the last light, traces the crescent moon in the dirt with his boot, his lips curling into a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Ethan's words, spoken in a bedroom miles away, are no longer just words. They're a map, a prophecy, a thread pulling tighter around the throat of Raytown. The town doesn't know it yet, but the first shadow has fallen, and 12 more wait in the wings. Ethan's mind, a kaleidoscope of brilliance and chaos, holds the key or the curse. For Laura, for Sarah, for the people of Raytown, the question isn't just who killed Thomas Hargrove, but whether a child's fractured visions are merely echoes of madness or the blueprint of a nightmare that's only beginning to take shape as the days blurred into a haze of grief and suspicion following Thomas Hargrove's murder. Raytown's veneer of suburban normalcy began to crack like old paint under relentless sun. The bakery remained shuttered, its windows papered over with yellowed newspapers, while whispers of foul play slithered through backyard fences and grocery store aisles. Laura Hargrove, Ethan's mother, found herself adrift in a sea of unease, her nights fractured by her son's murmurs and her days haunted by the radio's grim updates. She had taken to jotting down Ethan's cryptic phrases in a spiral notebook hidden in her nightstand, pages filling with scrawled names and symbols that seemed plucked from the ether. Mary by the water, he'd said. And though Laura tried to bury it under layers of denial, the words festered like an untreated wound. On July 18th, just 4 days after Thomas's body was discovered, the Little Blue River, a lazy ribbon of water winding through Raytown's eastern edge, became the stage for the next act in this unfolding tragedy. Mary Kessler, the librarian with her wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetual scent of old books clinging to her cardigans, walked her golden retriever, Buster, along the riverbank path every evening at precisely 7:30 p.m. It was her ritual, a quiet communion with nature that soothed the loneliness of her childless marriage and the monotony of shelving volumes at the Raytown Public Library. The river that evening shimmered under a canopy of cottonwoods, their leaves rustling like conspirators in the breeze. Mary tossed a stick for Buster, watching it arc into the underbrush, her mind wandering to the mystery novel she'd been reading, a tale of hidden poisons and shadowed motives. She didn't notice the figure lurking in the dense thicket, his silhouette merging with the twisted branches. Ray Carver had been here before, scouting the path with the patience of a predator, his crooked nose twitching at the scent of damp earth and impending rain. He clutched a length of nylon rope in his gloved hands, its fibers whispering promises of silence. As Mary bent to retrieve the stick, Ray struck swift as a serpent, looping the rope around her neck from behind. She gasped, claws scrabbling at the cord, but Ray's grip was iron, his breath hot and ragged against her ear. Buster barked furiously, lunging, but a vicious kick sent the dog yelping into the bushes. Mary's struggle was brief, her body going limp as the river's murmur drowned her final choked plea. Ray dragged her to the water's edge, weighting her down with stones from the bank, and pushed her into the current. As she sank, he etched a crescent moon into the mud with the heel of his boot, the symbol glistening wetly in the fading light, a mark that mirrored the one at the bakery, binding the deaths in an invisible chain. The discovery came the next morning when Buster, collar torn and fur matted with blood, scratched at the door of Mary's neighbor, an elderly widow named Edith Crane. Edith, peering through her lace curtains, saw the dog's distress and called the police. By noon, divers from the Kansas City Fire Department were combing the Little Blue, their wetsuits slicing through the murky water. Detective Sarah Klein arrived on scene, her boots sinking into the soft riverbank soil, her face a mask of grim determination. The body surfaced bloated and tangled in reeds, the rope still knotted around Mary's neck, her eyes staring blankly at the sky. Sarah knelt, noting the crescent moon etched nearby, its curves deliberate, almost artistic. "Same killer," she muttered to Mike Dougherty, who nodded, his usual skepticism cracking under the weight of evidence. But why her? No connection to the baker. They canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors, flashing photos of the moon symbol, but residents shook their heads, offering only platitudes and locked gazes. At the morgue, the coroner confirmed strangulation. No sexual assault, no theft, just death, clean and calculated, as if the act itself was the prize. Meanwhile, in the Hargrove home, Ethan's episodes intensified. He refused food, pacing his room in erratic patterns, his small feet tracing invisible maps on the carpet. Laura watched him, her nurse's instincts warring with maternal fear. "Who's next, Ethan?" she whispered one night, hating herself for asking, for feeding into what she prayed was delusion. His response came in a monotone chant. "The teacher in the red house. Fire eats the words." Laura's blood ran cold. She knew of a red brick schoolhouse on Maple Avenue, where Miss Elena Vargas taught 3rd grade. But she said nothing, not to the police, not even to her husband, who worked long hours at the auto plant and dismissed Ethan's fits as attention-seeking. Instead, she drove by the river that afternoon, staring at the yellow tape fluttering like morbid streamers, her mind replaying Ethan's words. Coincidence, she told herself, but the lie tasted bitter, like river water on her tongue. The town reeled, headlines in the Kansas City Star screaming, "River killer strikes again." Panic seeped in like fog. Parents kept children indoors. Locks were double-checked and prayer circles formed at the local Baptist church. Sarah Klein dove deeper into the investigation, pulling files on known offenders, cross-referencing the crescent moon with databases of symbols. It nagged at her, reminiscent of lunar phases and old folklore, but nothing clicked. She interviewed Mary's husband, a quiet accountant who wept openly, swearing his wife had no enemies. "She loved books," he sobbed, "and that damn dog." Buster, now in Edith's care, howled at night as if mourning the loss of more than his owner. Ray Carver, meanwhile, melted back into Raytown's underbelly, taking a janitorial job at the community center to blend in, his days filled with mopping floors and his nights with planning. He felt a pull, an inexplicable compulsion toward certain names, faces that flickered in his mind like half-remembered dreams. Where did they come from? He didn't question it, only obeyed, carving his moons as talismans against the void. Ethan's mind, a storm of synapses firing in patterns no neurotypical brain could fathom, bridged the gap between victim and killer in ways Laura could scarcely imagine. His autism wasn't just a barrier. It was a conduit, amplifying signals from the ether, perhaps psychic echoes or something darker, a subconscious link to Ray's fractured psyche. Psychiatrists would later debate it, savant syndrome laced with precognition, or mere coincidence amplified by trauma. For now it manifested in drawings, pages of crescent moons linked by lines to stick figures, each labeled with names yet to die. Laura found one under his pillow, her breath catching at Elena scrawled in childish script. She burned it in the sink, watching the ashes swirl down the drain. But the image lingered, a brand on her soul. As the sun set on July 19th, casting long shadows over Raytown, the community center's bulletin board fluttered with missing person flyers for Mary, though her body was already found. Ray passed by, his finger tracing a moon in the dust unseen. Across town, Elena Vargas graded papers in her red brick home, oblivious to the whisper of fire in Ethan's prophecy. The chain tightened, pulling Raytown deeper into the abyss, where a boy's visions wove the fabric of fate and the next shadow loomed, hungry and inevitable. The embers of Mary Kessler's unsolved murder still smoldered in the collective memory of Raytown as July 20th dawned, hot and unrelenting, with heat waves rippling off the sidewalks like visible sighs of exhaustion. The Little Blue River, now cordoned off with fluttering police tape, had become a macabre landmark, drawing curious onlookers who murmured theories under their breath while shielding their eyes from the glare. Detective Sarah Klein spent her morning at the station, her desk buried under stacks of reports, coffee rings staining the edges like accusatory eyes. She pinned photos of the crescent moon symbols to a corkboard, connecting them with red yarn that formed a nascent web of conspiracy. 2 victims, no links, she said to Mike Dougherty, who leaned against the doorframe chewing a toothpick. Baker and librarian, different ages, jobs, neighborhoods. But these moons, they're the thread. Mike grunted, suggesting a copycat, but Sarah shook her head. The precision was too consistent, the motives too opaque. She decided to revisit the bakery scene, hoping fresh eyes might unearth an overlooked clue, while the town buzzed with fear-fueled rumors. A serial killer, a cult, or worse. Something supernatural whispered in barbershops and beauty salons. In the Hargrove home, Laura's world contracted to the confines of her son's room, where Ethan sat amid a fortress of books and drawings, his fingers smudged with charcoal from sketching endless crescents linked by fiery lines. She had called in sick to work, her supervisor's sympathetic voice a thin balm over her fraying nerves. Ethan's latest mutterings, "Fire eats the words," echoed in her mind like a mantra of doom. She watched him from the doorway, his rocking a rhythmic counterpoint to her pounding heart. "What do you see, baby?" she whispered, not expecting an answer, but Ethan paused, his gaze locking onto hers with unnerving intensity. "Red house burns. Teacher screams the stars." Laura's stomach lurched. The red brick schoolhouse on Maple Avenue loomed in her thoughts, home to Elena Vargas, a vibrant 32-year-old educator known for her passion for literature and astronomy clubs. Elena lived in a modest red cottage adjacent to the school, its walls painted a cheerful crimson that now seemed ominous in Laura's imagination. She debated calling the police, an anonymous tip perhaps, but fear of ridicule, of labeling Ethan as unstable, stayed her hand. Instead, she drove aimlessly, passing the cottage where Elena's car sat in the driveway, unaware that shadows were already converging. Elena Vargas spent her afternoon in the quiet sanctuary of her home, grading summer reading assignments. Her living room a cozy clutter of bookshelves groaning under tomes of Shakespeare and Sagan. The air conditioner hummed softly, battling the oppressive heat, while a fan oscillated lazy breezes across scattered papers. She sipped iced tea, oblivious to the figure watching from the tree line across the street. Ray Carver, his wiry frame camouflaged by foliage, a canister of gasoline slung over his shoulder like a casual accessory. His mind, a fractured mosaic of impulses, fixated on Elena's name, pulled from the same ethereal source that guided him to Thomas and Mary. It wasn't rage or lust that drove him. It was a compulsion, a voice in his head that whispered directives in the cadence of a child's chant. As twilight descended, painting the sky in hues of bruised orange, Ray slipped into the backyard, his boots silent on the grass. He doused the foundation with gasoline, the fumes rising like malevolent spirits, then struck a match. Flames erupted with a whoosh, greedy tongues licking up the walls, devouring the red paint and blackened curls. Inside, Elena smelled smoke first, a acrid tang that jerked her from her reverie. She rushed to the window, heart seizing at the sight of fire climbing like ivy. Panic surged as she grabbed her phone, dialing 911. but the line crackled dead. Ray had cut the wires earlier, a calculated move. She bolted for the door, but flames blocked the exit, heat blistering her skin. Coughing, eyes streaming, she retreated to the bathroom, stuffing towels under the door, but the inferno roared louder, consuming books in explosive pops, words turning to ash as Ethan had foreseen. Ray watched from the shadows, etching a crescent moon into a tree trunk with his knife, the bark yielding like flesh. Neighbors, alerted by the blaze, called emergency services, sirens wailing in the distance. But by the time firefighters arrived, the cottage was an inferno, Elena's screams swallowed by the crackle of collapsing beams. Her body was recovered later, charred beyond recognition, the coroner noting accelerant traces and the deliberate sabotage, no accident, but arson with murderous intent. The news hit Raytown like a thunderclap. The Kansas City Star's evening edition splashed with headlines: Teacher perishes in suspicious blaze. Sarah Klein raced to the scene, the air thick with soot and sorrow, her flashlight beam catching the glint of the carved moon on the tree. 3 now, she breathed, connecting it to the others, her theory solidifying. A killer marking his territory with lunar symbols, victims chosen without apparent pattern. She interviewed witnesses, one describing a shadowy figure fleeing the scene, matching the vague descriptions from the river. Mike, surveying the ruins, found a melted gasoline can, fingerprints smudged but potentially salvageable. Back at the station, they ran it through the database, but no hits yet. Ray's record was clean, his existence a ghost in the system. The community center, where Ray mopped floors by day, became a hub for vigils, candles flickering in memory of Elena, while parents hugged their children tighter, wondering who might be next. Laura, hearing the report on the car radio as she drove home, pulled over, vomiting onto the roadside. Ethan's words, "Fire eats the words," rang true. Elena's library of knowledge reduced to cinders. She confronted her son that night, kneeling before him as he drew flames engulfing stick figures. "How do you know these things, Ethan?" Her voice cracked, tears blurring her vision. He didn't look up but murmured, "The mechanic under the bridge. Metal twists the bones." Laura's breath hitched. The old railroad bridge over the Blue River housed a mechanics shop run by Victor Lang, a burly man in his 50s known for fixing cars with wrench and wit. She resolved to act, but anonymity weighed heavy. What if they thought her crazy? Or worse, suspected Ethan? The psychiatric undertones gnawed at her. Was her boy's autism masking something profound, like extrasensory perception? Or was it a delusion sinking with reality by cruel chance? Ray, retreating to his dingy apartment on the town's fringes, felt the pull strengthen, names cascading in his mind like falling dominoes. He sharpened his knife, the blade catching lamplight. While across town, Victor Lang tinkered under a lifted car, grease-streaked and humming a tune, unaware of the metal's impending betrayal. The web tightened. Ethan's visions the unwitting spinneret, weaving death's pattern across Raytown, where fear now walked hand in hand with the ordinary, and the next prophecy loomed like smoke on the horizon. The acrid scent of charred wood lingered over Maple Avenue, long after the firefighters doused the last embers of Elena Vargas's cottage, a grim reminder that Raytown's nightmare was far from over. By July 22nd, the town had transformed into a fortress of suspicion, with neighborhood watch groups patrolling streets armed with flashlights and walkie-talkies, their conversations laced with paranoia. At the police station, Sarah Klein's corkboard had grown into a chaotic mosaic. Photos of Thomas, Mary, and now Elena pinned alongside sketches of the crescent moon symbols, red yarn weaving a tangled narrative that pointed to a single elusive killer. She paced the room, her mind churning through possibilities. Ritualistic murders tied to lunar phases, perhaps inspired by some obscure cult or personal mythology. Mike Dougherty, nursing a lukewarm coffee, suggested canvassing transients, but Sarah's instincts screamed otherwise. The kills were too precise, too intimate to the victims' lives. She pulled Victor Lang's name from a tip-line call, an anonymous woman mentioning a mechanic under the bridge in a voice trembling with fear. Dismissing it as hearsay at first, Sarah filed it away, unaware that the tip came from Laura Hargrove, who had finally mustered the courage to dial from a payphone, her hands shaking as she disguised her voice. Victor Lang's auto shop nestled beneath the old railroad bridge spanning the Blue River, a cavernous space echoing with the clang of tools and the rumble of passing trains. At 54, Victor was a Raytown staple, his grease-stained overalls and booming laugh as familiar as the bridge's rusting girders. He specialized in vintage cars, his shop a museum of chrome and engine blocks, where locals brought their breakdowns for his magic touch. That afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting elongated shadows through the bridge's latticework, Victor worked alone on a '68 Mustang, its hood propped open like a gaping maw. He hummed an old rock tune, wrench in hand, oblivious to the figure approaching from the riverbank. Ray Carver, his steps muffled by the soft earth, a coil of heavy chain draped over his shoulder like a serpent. Ray's mind buzzed with the next directive. Metal twists the bones, a phrase that had invaded his thoughts during a sleepless night, compelling him forward with the inexorability of tide. He paused in the doorway, watching Victor's back, the mechanic's muscles rippling under his shirt as he tightened a bolt. The attack unfolded in a blur of violence. Ray swung the chain like a whip, the links cracking against Victor's skull with a sickening thud. Victor staggered, blood welling from a gash, but he was no easy prey. Years of heavy lifting had forged him strong. He roared, grabbing a crowbar from his workbench, swinging it wildly. The two men clashed in a frenzy of metal and flesh, the shop resounding with grunts and clashes, tools scattering across the oil-slicked floor. Ray dodged a blow, countering with the chain looped around Victor's arm, yanking hard enough to dislocate the shoulder with a pop that echoed like gunfire. Victor howled, dropping the crowbar, but Ray pressed the advantage, wrapping the chain around his neck, pulling tight as Victor's boots scraped futilely against the concrete. Veins bulged, eyes protruded, and finally, with a gurgling rasp, Victor went limp, his body crumpling amid the engine parts. Ray, panting, arranged the scene meticulously, twisting the chain into a grotesque knot around Victor's limbs, contorting his bones in unnatural angles as if the metal itself had rebelled against its master. Before leaving, he etched the crescent moon into a nearby workbench with a screwdriver, the grooves deep and deliberate, a signature now infamous in Sarah's files. Word of the murder spread like wildfire the next morning, when Victor's apprentice arrived to find the shop a slaughterhouse, blood pooling around the twisted corpse. The boy, barely 18, vomited outside before calling the police, his voice hysterical over the line. Sarah and Mike arrived amid flashing lights, the bridge overhead rumbling with the train's passage as if mocking their efforts. Sarah knelt by the body, noting the chain's intricate binding, symbolic perhaps of entrapment or fate's cruel twists. 4 victims, she said, her voice steady but eyes betraying exhaustion, all marked with the moon. This isn't random. It's a sequence. They dusted for prints, finding partials on the chain that later matched nothing in the system. Ray's careful gloving a step ahead. The media descended. TV crews filming from the riverbank. Reporters thrusting microphones at shocked neighbors who recalled Victor's kindness, his free oil changes for widows. The Kansas City Star ran a front-page spread. Bridge butcher claims fourth, fueling a town meeting where residents demanded answers, their fear manifesting in shouts and accusations. Laura Hargrove, glued to the TV in her living room, felt the world tilt as footage of the crime scene flashed. Victor's shop, the bridge, the metal carnage mirroring Ethan's prophecy. She turned to her son, who sat cross-legged on the floor, assembling a model train set with mechanical precision, his face impassive. "You knew," she whispered, collapsing beside him, tears streaming. Ethan didn't respond directly, but his hands paused and he murmured, "The nurse in white. Needles break the skin." Laura's breath caught. As a nurse herself, the word struck too close, but she realized it pointed elsewhere. Perhaps Clara Benton, a pediatric nurse at the local clinic, known for her crisp white uniforms. Terror gripped her. Was Ethan predicting or somehow influencing? She confided in no one, not even her husband, who returned home weary from the plant, dismissing her concerns as stress. That night she lay awake, Ethan's notebook of drawings burning a hole in her drawer, crescents connected to names, a map of death she couldn't ignore. Ray Carver, meanwhile, retreated to the shadows, his janitorial shifts at the community center a perfect cover. He felt no remorse, only a growing elation, as if each kill completed a puzzle only he could see. The names came clearer now, whispered in dreams that featured a boy's voice, ethereal and insistent. He sharpened tools in his apartment, walls papered with stolen newspaper clippings, the crescent moon staring back like accusatory eyes. Across town, Clara Benton finished her shift at the clinic, locking up under the streetlights, her white scrubs glowing faintly. She walked to her car, keys jingling, unaware of the eyes tracking her from afar. The pattern accelerated. Ethan's mind, the unwitting fulcrum, balancing precognition and madness in a dance that pulled Raytown deeper into despair, where each death chipped away at the illusion of safety, and the next victim hovered on the precipice of revelation. The twisted remains of Victor Lang's body, entangled in chains like a macabre sculpture, haunted the dreams of those who glimpsed the crime scene photos leaked to the local press by July 24th. Raytown's underbelly, once a place of overlooked grit, now pulsed with the dread of an unseen predator, turning every clang of metal and shadow under bridges into potential omens. At the police station, Sarah Klein's investigation board resembled a war map. Pins marking the bakery, the river, the burned cottage, and now the auto shop, each connected by threads that formed a cryptic constellation. She rubbed her temples, the fluorescent lights buzzing like insistent flies, as she cross-referenced victim profiles: Thomas the baker, Mary the librarian, Elena the teacher, Victor the mechanic. No common threads in age, gender, or social circles, yet all bound by the crescent moon sigil. "It's like he's following a list," Sarah confided to Mike Doherty over stale donuts, her voice laced with frustration. Mike, ever the pragmatist, suggested checking psychiatric records for released patients obsessed with lunar motifs. But Sarah's mind drifted to the anonymous tip about the mechanic, prophetic almost. She dispatched officers to patrol high-risk areas, but Raytown's sprawl made it a sieve. Leaks everywhere. The mayor called a press conference, assuring residents of increased security, but his words rang hollow amid rising panic. Stores selling out of deadbolts and pepper spray. Clara Benton, the pediatric nurse at Raytown Family Clinic, embodied the town's fading sense of care and normalcy. At 41, with soft brown curls and a smile that eased children's fears, she spent her days administering vaccines and bandaging scraped knees, her white uniform a symbol of healing in a community unraveling. On July 25th, as the afternoon sun baked the clinic's parking lot, Clara finished her shift, waving goodbye to colleagues who joked about the moon maniac in hushed tones. She carried a tote bag filled with syringes and medical supplies for a home visit to an elderly patient, her sensible shoes clicking on the asphalt. Unbeknownst to her, Ray Carver had shadowed the clinic for days, his janitorial uniform from the community center granting him invisibility as he mopped hallways nearby. The compulsion struck him mid-shift. "Needles break the skin," a refrain that looped in his fractured thoughts, drawing him to Clara like a moth to flame. He followed her at a distance, his wiry frame blending with pedestrians, until she reached her modest apartment complex on Oak Street, a cluster of low-rise buildings surrounded by wilting flower beds. As dusk settled, painting the sky in somber grays, Ray slipped into the complex through an unlocked gate, his gloved hands clutching a stolen syringe from the clinic's dumpster. Ironic, fitting. Clara unlocked her door, stepping into the cool dimness of her living room, adorned with framed photos of smiling patients and potted ferns that thrived under her gentle care. She set her bag down, humming a lullaby she'd sung to a fussy toddler earlier, when the door creaked behind her. Ray, silent as smoke, had jimmied the lock. He lunged, clamping a hand over her mouth, the syringe plunging into her neck with practiced precision. Clara's eyes widened in terror, her body convulsing as air bubbles coursed through her veins. A deliberate embolism engineered from medical knowledge gleaned from overheard conversations. She clawed at his arm, nails drawing blood, but Ray held firm, whispering nonsense about moons and shadows as her struggles weakened. When life ebbed, he arranged her on the couch, syringes from her bag inserted into her arms and legs like porcupine quills, breaking the skin in a tableau of violated sanctity. Before departing, he carved the crescent moon into her wooden coffee table, the knife's scrape a final desecration. The body was discovered the next morning by a co-worker, concerned when Clara missed her shift. The clinic buzzed with horror as police swarmed, Sarah Klein arriving to a scene that twisted her gut. The needles, a perversion of healing, mirroring the killer's escalating symbolism. "He's mocking their professions," she noted, photographing the moon carving, its curves now a hated emblem across Raytown. Forensics teams combed for DNA, finding a stray hair that would later yield no matches. Ray's caution bordering on the supernatural. The news exploded. Nurse slain in syringe horror. The fifth victim fueling town hall meetings where residents demanded curfews and National Guard intervention. Sarah interviewed Clara's colleagues, learning of a suspicious janitor seen lingering, but descriptions were vague. Ray's face unremarkable in a sea of forgettable ones. Mike canvassed the community center, but Ray had called in sick. His alibi a fabricated flu. In the Hargrove household, Laura's sanity frayed like worn thread. The TV report on Clara's death confirming Ethan's eerie accuracy once more. She paced the kitchen, her husband at work, leaving her alone with the boy who sat at the table meticulously arranging silverware into lunar patterns. "Why Clara?" she demanded, gripping his shoulders, but Ethan's gaze remained distant, his voice a monotone. The grocer's scales tip. Poison weighs the fruit. Laura's knees buckled. The local grocery on Pine Street was run by Harold Green, a portly man in his 60s known for his antique scales and fresh produce. She debated confronting authorities, visions of Ethan in a psychiatric ward flashing like nightmares. Autism intertwined with something inexplicable, perhaps a form of clairvoyance documented in rare cases, or a subconscious link to the killer's mind. Psychologists she consulted online in secret spoke of savant abilities, but none prepared her for this cascade of death. That night she locked doors and windows, hugging Ethan close, his small body rigid yet comforting, as if his predictions were a shield rather than a curse. Ray Carver, holed up in his apartment, felt the rush of completion, each kill sharpening his senses, the boy's voice in his dreams growing clearer, a spectral guide naming the next. He pored over a pilfered phone book, fingers tracing names, the crescent moon tattooed crudely on his forearm a constant reminder. At the grocery, Harold Green stocked shelves oblivious to the tainted fruit that would soon arrive, courtesy of Ray's nocturnal sabotage. The killings accelerated, Ethan's prophecies the unseen engine, driving Raytown toward a breaking point where suspicion poisoned every interaction. And the veil between the ordinary and the ominous thinned to transparency, inviting the sixth shadow to descend with poisoned precision. Suspicion hung over Raytown like a toxic fog by July 27th, seeping into every corner store conversation and sidelong glance at strangers passing on the sidewalk. The string of murders, now 5 each marked by that infernal crescent moon, had turned the once sleepy suburb into a pressure cooker of paranoia, where neighbors eyed each other with the wariness of potential threats. At the police station, Sarah Klein's team worked around the clock, their eyes bloodshot from poring over evidence logs and witness statements that led nowhere substantial. The anonymous tip line buzzed with calls, most hysterical delusions, but one recurring theme emerged: whispers of a shadow man seen lurking near crime scenes. Descriptions varying from tall and gaunt to average and unassuming. Sarah tacked up a composite sketch based on fragmented accounts. A man with a crooked nose, sharp features blurred by inconsistency. "He's a ghost," Mike Doherty grumbled, slamming a file down, but Sarah disagreed. Ghost didn't leave fingerprints, and a partial print from Clara's apartment nagged at her, awaiting lab results. The mayor's office pressured for arrests, but without concrete leads. Sarah focused on patterns. Victims' professions twisted into their deaths. A sadistic poetry that suggested a killer with intimate knowledge of the town. She mapped the sites on a wall chart, noting their proximity to the Blue River, as if the water itself carried the curse. Harold Green's grocery on Pine Street stood as a bastion of normalcy amid the chaos, its neon sign flickering Green's Fresh Market in welcoming green letters. At 63, Harold was a rotund figure with a walrus mustache and a perpetual twinkle in his eye, weighing produce on antique brass scales that clinked like old friends. His store smelled of ripe apples and fresh-baked bread, a sensory haven where locals lingered for gossip as much as groceries. On July 28th, as the heat wave peaked, Harold arranged pyramids of fruit in the window display, oranges glowing like miniature suns, grapes clustered in verdant bunches. He chatted with customers about the murders, offering reassurances laced with his own unease. "Stick together, folks. Evil can't touch a community like ours." Unseen by him, Ray Carver browsed the aisles earlier that day, his janitorial cap pulled low, slipping small vials into his pocket from a hidden stash. The compulsion had struck again during a feverish nap. Poison weighs the fruit, echoing in Ethan's distant voice that haunted his subconscious. Ray selected items carefully, a cantaloupe here, a bunch of bananas there, injecting each with a lethal cocktail of rat poison and antifreeze. His gloved hands steady as a surgeon's. He replaced them on the shelves, the tainted harvest blending seamlessly with the innocent. then paid with cash and vanished into the crowd. The poison worked insidiously, its effects delayed to mask the source. That evening, Harold sampled a grape from a bunch as he closed up, the juice bursting sweet on his tongue, unaware of the bitter undercurrent. By midnight, cramp seized him in his apartment above the store, his body convulsing on the kitchen floor as organs failed in agonizing sequence. Foam flecked his lips, eyes bulging in silent accusation, until death claimed him in a pool of vomit tinged with unnatural blue. Ray, watching from a parked car across the street, felt a surge of fulfillment, slipping away to etch his crescent moon on the store's back alley wall, paint still wet from a recent touch-up. The discovery came at dawn when Harold's assistant, a young woman named Tina, unlocked the doors to find the lights on and a foul odor wafting from upstairs. She found him twisted in rigor, scales from the store clutched in his hand as if weighing his own fate. Police arrived swiftly. The scene a grotesque parody of abundance. Fruit scattered, some half-eaten, tests later revealing the contamination. Sarah Klein surveyed the apartment, her nose wrinkling at the chemical stench, recognizing the moon graffitied outside as the killer's seal. 6 now, she said, her voice hollow, as forensics bagged tainted produce, tracing the poison to common household items, no fingerprints to pin. The store was quarantined, customers who shopped that day notified in a panic-inducing alert, hospitals filling with worried hypochondriacs. The media frenzy intensified, poisoned produce panic, grocer's 6th victim. Headlines screaming across front pages, eroding what little trust remained in Raytown's daily life. Sarah interviewed Tina, learning of a nondescript customer lingering near the fruit, but details were scant. Back at the station, the partial print from Clara's scene matched a smudge on a vial fragment. Still no database hit, but it confirmed the killer's escalating boldness. Community vigils turned to protests, demands for federal intervention echoing in the town square. While parents forbade children from eating anything not homegrown, Laura Hargrove, scanning the morning paper in her kitchen, felt a vice tighten around her chest at Harold's photo, his jolly face now a death mask. Ethan's words, "Poison weighs the fruit," had manifested yet again, a pattern too precise for coincidence. She confronted her son in his room, where he stacked blocks into towering structures resembling grave markers, his focus unbreakable. "Harold, the grocer. You saw it," she said, voice breaking, but Ethan continued building, murmuring, "The preacher's words burn. Faith crumbles in ash." Laura's mind raced to Reverend Paul Whitaker, pastor at the Raytown Baptist Church, known for his fiery sermons that packed pews every Sunday. She trembled at the implication. Fire again like Elena's death, but now targeting faith itself. Desperation clawed at her. She considered psychiatric evaluation for Ethan, recalling articles on autistic savants with purported psychic abilities, cases where children predicted events through subconscious cues. But revealing him risked exposure, perhaps even suspicion. That afternoon, she drove by the church, its steeple piercing the sky like a defiant finger. Reverend Whitaker greeting parishioners outside. Oblivious to the ash that loomed in prophecy, Ray Carver, invigorated by the chaos he'd sown, retreated to his lair, walls now a collage of victim clippings circled in red marker, connected by strings mimicking Sarah's board. The voices grew louder, Ethan's ethereal chants naming the next with clarity that bordered on possession. He gathered matches and accelerant, the preacher's face flashing in his mind's eye, drawn from a church bulletin pilfered days prior. At the church, Reverend Whitaker prepared his evening sermon, words of solace scripted against the town's despair, unaware that faith's foundation was about to crumble under flames. The death toll mounted, Ethan's visions the silent architect, forging a path of destruction that bound killer and seer in an unholy symbiosis, pushing Raytown closer to collapse as the 7th shadow ignited with incendiary wrath. The poison that claimed Harold Green left a bitter aftertaste in Raytown's collective mouth, not just from the tainted fruit hastily discarded in trash bins across neighborhoods, but from the erosion of trust that turned every meal into a gamble and every stranger into a suspect. By July 30th, the grocery store stood abandoned, its windows boarded up like eyes shut against the horror, while health inspectors combed through similar establishments, their white suits a stark contrast to the colorful produce they condemned. Sarah Klein's investigation had ballooned into a task force, reinforced by state troopers who set up checkpoints on major roads, their cruisers flashing blue and red like erratic heartbeats. She huddled with her team in a makeshift war room at the station, walls plastered with timelines and victim photos, the crescent moon symbols replicated in marker as if mocking their efforts. A breakthrough teased at the edges. A DNA partial from Clara's scene matched skin cells under Harold's nails, suggesting the killer wasn't infallible. "He's getting sloppy," Sarah said, pinning a map with potential hideouts, her finger lingering on the community center where vague reports of a suspicious janitor persisted. Mike Dougherty chased leads on poison purchases, interviewing hardware store clerks who recalled a man with a crooked nose buying antifreeze in bulk. But security footage was grainy, identities elusive. The anonymous tips continued, one recent call mentioning a preacher's fire, dismissed as crank until Sarah's instincts prickled. Prophetic. Warnings that aligned too neatly with the death sequence. Reverend Paul Whitaker's Baptist Church on Elmwood. Avenue served as Raytown's spiritual anchor, its white steeple a beacon amid the storm of murders, drawing crowds seeking solace in numbers. At 58, the Reverend was a commanding presence with a voice like rolling thunder, his sermons blending fire and brimstone warnings with messages of redemption that filled the oak pews every service. On July 31st, as evening service concluded, parishioners filed out under a sky heavy with storm clouds, their handshakes and hugs of fragile armor against fear. Paul lingered in the sanctuary, adjusting hymnals and extinguishing candles, the scent of wax mingling with polished wood. He reflected on his next sermon, a call to unity against the shadow of evil plaguing their town, words scripted on yellow legal pads strewn across his desk in the adjacent office. Unbeknownst to him, Ray Carver had infiltrated the congregation earlier, posing as a newcomer seeking guidance, his wiry frame hunched in the back row, absorbing the Reverend's cadence. The vision had come to Ray in a trance-like state the night before. The preacher's words burn, faith crumbles in ash, a directive that ignited a fervor within him, compelling him to gather gasoline cans and matches from his apartment's cluttered storage. As the last car left the parking lot, Ray emerged from the tree line, his steps purposeful, the can sloshing like liquid malice. The arson began subtly, a trail of accelerant poured along the church's foundation, seeping into cracks like venom through veins. Ray circled the building, dousing doors and windows, his breath steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. He struck the match inside the vestibule, flames leaping to life with a hungry roar, devouring curtains and racing up walls adorned with crucifixes that blackened and warped. Paul, hearing the crackle from his office, rushed out, smoke already billowing like a demonic fog. "Lord have mercy," he gasped, grabbing a fire extinguisher from the wall. But the blaze had spread too fast, blocking exits in a wall of heat. Coughs racked his body as he retreated to the altar, clutching his Bible, flames licking at the pulpit where his words had once thundered. The structure groaned, beams cracking like judgments from above as Paul knelt in prayer, his final sermon a whispered plea lost in the Inferno's symphony. Ray watched from afar, the fire's glow illuminating his crooked features before carving the crescent moon into a nearby oak tree, bark shavings curling like damned souls. The church collapsed in a cascade of sparks and embers, faith's edifice reduced to rubble, Paul's charred remains buried under the altar's ruins. Firefighters battled the blaze through the night, their hoses arcing water into the maw of destruction, but salvation came too late. The church was a smoldering skeleton by dawn, acrid smoke blanketing Raytown like a shroud. Sarah Klein arrived at first light, her boots crunching over debris, the air thick with the scent of burned wood and something deeper, like scorched hope. She spotted the moon carving immediately, its presence confirming the killer's handiwork. 7 victims, she murmured to Mike, who surveyed the wreckage with a grim shake of his head. Forensics sifted through ashes, finding accelerant residues in a melted gas can cap, linking it to previous purchases. The community reeled. The church had been a refuge, its loss a spiritual gut punch that amplified grief into outrage. Memorial services shifted to the high school gym, where tearful eulogies mixed with calls for justice. The Kansas City Star's headline, "Holy Inferno, Preacher Perishes in Church Blaze, Fanning Flames of Fear." Sarah interviewed survivors, one recalling a stranger in the back pew, description matching the composite, crooked nose, darting eyes. A lead solidified. The community center's janitor, Ray Carver, absent during the fire, his personnel file revealing a transient history with gaps that screamed suspicion. Laura Hargrove, awakened by sirens blaring through the night, watched the glow on the horizon from her window, her heart sinking as news reports confirmed the church's destruction and Reverend Whitaker's death. Ethan's prophecy, faith crumbles in ash, had struck again, a relentless tide eroding her denial. She found her son in the living room, staring at the TV screen, his small hands clenched, rocking gently as if syncing with the flame's rhythm. "You knew about the preacher," she said, voice trembling, kneeling to meet his gaze. Ethan didn't flinch, his response a soft chant. "The doctor's cure fails. Blood floods the halls." Laura's mind whirled to Dr. Miriam Hale, the town's general practitioner at Raytown Medical Center, renowned for her compassionate care and white coat stained with the battles of healing. Panic surged. The predictions accelerated, each death closing the noose around her secret. She researched autism and precognition late into the night, forums filled with anecdotal tales of children glimpsing futures through sensory overload, psychiatric cases blending neurology with the paranormal, but theory offered no solace. Ethan's visions tethered to reality in ways that defied science, perhaps a telepathic link forged in coincidence or something darker, like a shared psychosis with the killer. Dawn found her resolved. She would shadow Dr. Hale anonymously, a guardian against the inevitable, her nurse's instincts warring with maternal terror. Ray Carver, exalted by the fire's spectacle, returned to his apartment, the scent of smoke clinging to his clothes like a lover's perfume. His walls, now a shrine to his deeds, featured charred remnants pilfered from the church. A singed Bible page, words of revelation twisted into ash. The voices intensified, Ethan's spectral guidance naming the doctor with vivid urgency, pulling Ray toward the medical center where he planned his next infiltration. At the clinic, Dr. Hale treated patients with steady hands, prescribing remedies for ailments mundane and dire, unaware that her cure would soon fail against a flood of blood. The body count climbed, Ethan's mind the unwitting oracle, scripting a symphony of slaughter that resonated through Raytown's veins, where loss compounded into collective trauma, and the eighth shadow loomed with hemorrhagic intent. The smoldering ruins of the Baptist church cast a pall over Raytown that extended far beyond the physical debris, infiltrating the psyche of every resident as August 1st broke with a relentless downpour that turned ashes to mud and streets to rivers of regret. The loss of Reverend Whitaker wasn't just the death of a man. It was the assassination of hope, leaving parishioners to gather in makeshift venues like the community center's gymnasium, where folding chairs creaked under the weight of collective sorrow and sermons were delivered, with voices cracked by doubt. Sarah Klein stood amid the wreckage that morning, rain slicking her hair and soaking her trench coat, her flashlight beam cutting through the mist to illuminate the carved crescent moon on the oak tree, its edges softened by water but no less menacing. "He's targeting pillars of the community," she told Mike Doherty, who shielded a cigarette from the drizzle, his face etched with lines deepened by sleepless nights. The task force had expanded, FBI consultants now hovering like vultures, analyzing the pattern. Professions perverted in death, from baked goods bludgeoned to faith incinerated. A tip from the community center's manager pointed to Ray Carver's erratic attendance, his file revealing a history of petty crimes in other states, vagrancy, minor assaults that painted him as a drifter with a penchant for vanishing. Sarah issued a bolo, his composite sketch distributed to patrols, but Raytown's labyrinth of back alleys and abandoned lots offered ample hiding. The DNA evidence mounted, cross-matches from multiple scenes suggesting a single perpetrator whose caution was fraying at the edges, perhaps emboldened by his unchecked spree. Dr. Miriam Hale's medical center on Central Avenue buzzed with activity despite the storm. Patients shuffling in with umbrellas dripping puddles on the linoleum floors, seeking remedies for ailments amplified by stress. Insomnia, anxiety, the occasional hypochondriac convinced the killer's poison lingered in the air. At 52, Miriam was a pillar herself, her silver-streaked hair pulled into a practical bun, her stethoscope a constant companion that listened to heartbeats racing with fear. She moved through exam rooms with calm efficiency, prescribing antibiotics for a child's ear infection, counseling a widow on grief management, her white coat a symbol of unwavering care in a town where trust eroded daily. That afternoon, as thunder rumbled like distant artillery, Miriam reviewed charts in her office, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, unaware that Ray Carver had infiltrated the building under the guise of a maintenance worker, his toolkit concealing a scalpel pilfered from supply closets. The vision had assaulted him the previous night, vivid and commanding. The doctor's cure fails. Blood floods the halls. A mandate that propelled him through the rain-slicked streets, his crooked nose dripping as he forged a fake work order. He navigated the corridors, blending with orderlies and scrubs, his pulse syncing with the beeps of monitors, until he reached the supply room adjacent to Miriam's office. The assault erupted in a frenzy of calculated savagery. Ray burst into her office as she bent over paperwork, the scalpel flashing like lightning in the storm's gloom. Miriam spun, her eyes widening in recognition of peril, grabbing a desk lamp to swing as a weapon, but Ray dodged, slashing across her arm in a spray of arterial blood that arced across the walls like abstract art. She screamed, alerting nurses in the hall, but Ray pressed on, stabbing with precision born of compulsion. Throat, chest, abdomen, each wound a perversion of surgical skill. Blood pooling on the floor and seeping under the door, Miriam collapsed, gasping cures that failed her own body. Her hands slick as she clutched at wounds that gushed relentlessly. Chaos ensued. Nurses rushing in, slipping in the crimson flood, one dialing 911 while another applied pressure with trembling hands. Ray fled through a side exit, etching the crescent moon on the doorframe with the bloody scalpel, the symbol dripping rivulets that mingled with rain outside. Alarms blared, patients evacuating in panic. The halls indeed flooded with blood and terror, a tableau that mirrored Ethan's prophecy in grotesque detail. Emergency responders swarmed the medical center, paramedics pronouncing Miriam dead at the scene. Her body a map of incisions that spoke of intimate knowledge. Perhaps Ray had observed her procedures during his reconnaissance. Sarah Klein arrived amid the flashing lights, the rain now a torrent that washed evidence into gutters. But the moon carving remained, defiant and fresh. 8 victims, she declared, her voice cutting through the hubbub. As forensics photographed the scene, bagging the scalpel discarded in a dumpster nearby, its blade yielding fingerprints that would later match the partials accumulating in the database. The breakthrough came swiftly, a hit on Ray Carver's prints from a prior misdemeanor, his name lighting up screens like a flare. Warrants issued, SWAT teams mobilizing to his last known address, but Ray had ghosted. His apartment a vacated shell littered with clippings and crescent doodles that chilled investigators to the bone. The media descended, broadcasting live from the bloodied halls. Doctor butchered in clinic carnage, the 8th strike amplifying calls for martial law, residents barricading homes with furniture, the town's pulse erratic with dread. Laura Hargrove, monitoring the frenzy from her living room radio as rain lashed the windows, felt the world constrict around her. Dr. Hale's death another nail in the coffin of coincidence. She had shadowed the clinic earlier, parking across the street in futile vigilance, but the storm had obscured her view, leaving her to return home defeated. Ethan sat in his rocking chair, tracing patterns on fogged glass, his demeanor unchanged amid the turmoil. "The doctor. Blood," Laura whispered, collapsing into a chair, her nurse's uniform still on from a shift cut short by news alerts. Ethan's response came unbidden, his voice a hollow echo. "The banker's gold rusts." False echo with silence. Laura's breath hitched. The reference pointed to Elias Thorne, president of Raytown Savings and Loan, a man whose vault safeguarded the town's fortunes, his office a fortress of steel and secrecy. The predictions cascaded faster now, each death compressing time, forcing Laura to confront the impossible. Her son's autism as a gateway to foresight, documented in psychiatric annals as rare synesthetic perceptions, where sensory inputs translated to precognitive flashes. She debated fleeing with Ethan, but roots ran deep. Her job, her husband, the community crumbling around them. That night, as thunder shook the house, she pored over Ethan's drawings. Crescents linked to names in a chain leading to 13. The final ones blurred but ominous, hinting at a climax that intertwined their fates. Ray Carver, evading capture in a derelict warehouse on the town's industrial fringe, felt the net tightening, sirens wailing in the distance like hounds on his scent. Yet the compulsion overrode fear, the boy's voice in his head now a constant companion, naming the banker with insistent clarity. He gathered tools, a crowbar, lockpicks, his mind a whirlwind of rust and silence, drawn to the bank where gold awaited its desecration. At the savings and loan, Elias Thorne audited ledgers late into the night, his safe a silent sentinel, unaware that vaults would soon echo with more than emptiness. The spree hurtled toward its zenith, Ethan's visions the inexorable current, sweeping Raytown into a maelstrom where revelations loomed larger than the storm, and the ninth shadow prepared to rust the foundations of security with unforgiving finality. The storm that had ravaged Raytown during Dr. Miriam Hale's murder lingered into August 2nd, its aftermath leaving streets slick with puddles that reflected the town's distorted reality, like fractured mirrors. The medical center, now a crime scene cordoned off with yellow tape fluttering in the wind, stood as a grim monument to the killer's audacity, patients rerouted to distant facilities where whispers of the moon maniac followed them like persistent shadows. Sarah Klein's task force operated on fumes, the bolo for Ray Carver plastered on every lamppost and broadcast on local news loops, his crooked-nosed mugshot staring out with eyes that seemed to mock their pursuit. Raids on his abandoned apartment yielded a treasure trove of madness. Walls scrawled with crescent moons and what forensics confirmed was victims' blood mixed with paint. Clippings arranged in a chronological altar that mirrored the death sequence with eerie accuracy. "He's documenting his work," Sarah said, gloved hands sifting through the detritus, uncovering a child's drawing pilfered from who knows where, depicting stick figures linked by lunar symbols. The FBI profiler, a stern woman named Agent Reyes, posited a delusional psychosis, perhaps lunar-themed schizophrenia, but Sarah sensed deeper currents, a pattern too prophetic, as if the killer anticipated the victims before the town even mourned them. Checkpoints yielded false positives, frustrated officers detaining lookalikes while Ray slipped through the net, his transient skills honed over years of evasion. The anonymous tip line overflowed with sightings, one caller mentioning a boy who knows in a muffled voice that Sarah traced to a payphone near the Hargrove residence. But leads evaporated like morning mist. Elias Thorne's Raytown Savings and Loan occupied a stately brick building on Main Street, its facade adorned with columns that evoked stability in an unstable world, vaults buried deep in the basement safeguarding deposits from generations of hardworking families. At 60, Elias was a meticulous man with wire-rimmed glasses and a penchant for bow ties, his days spent balancing ledgers and approving loans with a banker's cautious optimism. On August 3rd, as the sun broke through lingering clouds, Elias arrived early, unlocking the heavy oak doors with keys that jangled like omens. The lobby gleamed with polished marble, tellers' cages empty in the pre-opening hush, while Elias descended to the vault room, a fortified chamber humming with the soft whir of climate control. He reviewed overnight transfers, fingers dancing over keyboards, unaware that Ray Carver had cased the bank for days, posing as a potential customer inquiring about safety deposit boxes, his eyes mapping exits and blind spots. The compulsion had gripped Ray in his warehouse hideout. Visions of gold rusting and vaults echoing silence pounding like a migraine. Ethan's distant echo morphing into a siren's call that drowned out the sirens hunting him. Armed with a crowbar and corrosive acid stolen from an auto supply, Ray breached the rear service entrance at dawn, his movements silent as the grave, navigating corridors with the familiarity of a ghost revisiting haunts. The confrontation unfolded in the vault's sterile glow, Elias turning at the creak of the door, his face paling at the intruder clad in dark clothes, face obscured by a ski mask that failed to hide the crooked nose. "What do you want?" Elias stammered, backing against the safe's massive door. But Ray advanced without a word, swinging the crowbar in an arc that cracked against Elias's knee, dropping him with a cry that echoed off steel walls. Pain exploded as Ray pinned him, forcing the banker's hand to the biometric scanner, overriding locks with coerced compliance. Once inside, amid stacks of cash and gleaming safety boxes, Ray unleashed the acid, pouring it over piles of currency that sizzled and dissolved in acrid fumes, gold-hued bars corroding under the chemical assault like empires crumbling to dust. Elias watched in horror, pleading for mercy, but Ray turned the crowbar on him, blows raining down with methodical fury, ribs cracking, limbs twisting, until silence reigned, broken only by the drip of acid eating through metal. Ray arranged the body amid the rusted remnants, limbs splayed in a parody of a beggar's pose, before carving the crescent moon into the vault door with the crowbar's tip, grooves filling with dissolved residue that gleamed wetly. He fled through the ventilation shafts, emerging blocks away as alarms finally wailed, The bank's security system triggered by the unattended breach. The robbery-murder hybrid sent shockwaves through Raytown, employees arriving to a scene of desecration, vaults echoing with the void of stolen silence. Elias's body a mangled sentinel amid ruined fortunes. Sarah Klein rushed to the bank, navigating the chaos of flashing lights and distraught staff, her eyes hardening at the moon etching, its presence a taunt amid the financial carnage. 9 victims, she noted. Forensics teams cataloging the acid's composition, tracing it to recent thefts that looped back to Ray's known haunts. The loss wasn't just Elias. Thousands in deposits dissolved, insurance claims mounting as residents panicked, withdrawing funds in droves, the bank's stability rusting like the corroded gold. Media outlets dubbed it the Vault of Horror. Interviews with Elias's widow revealing a man devoted to community, his bow ties now symbols of strangled promise. Sarah's team closed in, surveillance footage capturing Ray's earlier visit, facial recognition confirming his identity, warrants expanding to statewide alerts. Agent Reyes analyzed the progression, escalating from isolated kills to public institutions, suggesting a manifesto in motion, perhaps culminating in a grand revelation. Laura Hargrove, learning of the bank heist turned homicide via urgent news bulletins interrupting her morning routine, felt the prophecy's weight crushing her spirit. Elias's fate aligning with Ethan's murmur of rusted gold and silent vaults. She had contemplated warning him anonymously, but fear of entanglement stayed her hand, leaving guilt to fester like an open wound. Ethan played in the yard, arranging stones into lunar patterns under the patchy sun, his innocence a stark contrast to the darkness he channeled. The banker, gone? Laura said, joining him on the grass, her voice a whisper carried by the breeze. Ethan's reply came softly, eyes fixed on the horizon. The mayor's throne falls. Power shatters like glass. Laura's pulse raced. Mayor Reginald Voss, the town's beleaguered leader, ensconced in his office at City Hall, a glass-fronted building symbolizing transparency now vulnerable to shattering. The visions intensified, each one a step closer to 13, forcing Laura to grapple with psychiatric possibilities. Ethan's autism as a neural anomaly, amplifying subconscious cues from news leaks or collective anxiety, manifesting as precognitive delusions. Yet the accuracy defied logic, hinting at a symbiotic link with Ray, perhaps forged in some forgotten encounter or shared trauma buried in Raytown's history. She resolved to seek help discreetly, contacting a specialist in neurodivergent phenomena. But time slipped away as sirens wailed anew. Ray Carver, flush with pilfered cash that survived the acid bath, hunkered in a new hideout, an abandoned mill by the Blue River, his mind a cauldron of escalating euphoria and paranoia. The voices, now distinctly childlike, named the mayor with vivid imagery of falling thrones and shattered glass, pulling him toward City Hall like a magnet to iron. He sharpened shards from broken bottles, envisioning power's fragility while across town, Mayor Voss addressed a press conference, vowing to end the terror, his glass podium gleaming under lights, oblivious to the fractures forming. The death march continued, Ethan's prophecies the unseen conductor, orchestrating a crescendo that bound seer and slayer in a tapestry of fate, where Raytown's pillars toppled one by one, and the 10th shadow poised to shatter the seat of power with crystalline violence. The storm that shattered Mayor Reginald Voss's glass-fronted City Hall on August 5, 1997, wasn't born of nature's fury but of a man's unraveling psyche, a tempest channeled through the fractured lens of a child's mind. As the final shards of the mayor's office window cascaded to the marble floor, like brittle confetti from a parade of doom, Ray Carver stood amid the wreckage, his hands bloodied from the crowbar that had pried open the doors of power. Voss, a portly man in his late 50s with a penchant for silk ties and empty promises, had been alone that night, poring over crisis reports on the murders that had gutted Raytown's soul. He never heard Ray approach, the killer's boots silent on the carpeted halls, driven by the inexorable whisper, the mayor's throne falls, power shatters like glass. The blow came swift, a swing to the head that sent Voss sprawling across his desk, papers scattering like leaves in a gale. Ray didn't stop there. He dragged the mayor to the expansive window overlooking the town square, pressing his face against the pane until it cracked under the pressure, then heaving him through in an explosion of glass that rained down like deadly icicles. Voss's body hit the pavement below with a thud that echoed through the empty streets, his limbs splayed in a broken crown. The throne of authority toppled forever. Ray lingered only to etch his crescent moon into the splintered frame, the symbol now a scar on the heart of governance before vanishing into the night. The 10th victim claimed in a spree that blurred the lines between prophecy and provocation. But the shadows didn't halt at 10. Ethan's visions, like a river swollen with unspoken horrors, carried onward to the 11th, a widow who tended gardens on the edge of town, her flowers wilting under the poison Ray sprinkled in her soil, her death a silent bloom of agony as toxins seeped into her veins through pricked fingers. The 12th fell in the dead of night. A young journalist named Kyle Redmond, whose investigative articles had begun to circle too close to Ray's trail. Ray cornered him in his apartment, strangling him with the cord of his own typewriter, words forever silenced as the crescent moon was inked onto a half-finished exposé. And the 13th, the culmination that tied the threads of fate into a noose, was none other than Detective Sarah Klein herself, who had pieced together the puzzle too late. In a rain-lashed confrontation at the old railroad bridge where Victor Lang's twisted body had first hinted at the pattern's depth, Sarah faced Ray amid the rusted girders, her gun drawn, but trembling. Ray, his eyes wild with the echoes of Ethan's chants now screaming in his skull, lunged with a shard of metal, piercing her side in a wound that flooded the planks with blood. She fired once, grazing his shoulder, but the compulsion drove him onward, his hands closing around her throat until her struggles ceased. Her final breath a gasp that mingled with the river's murmur below. Ray carved the moon one last time on the bridge's beam, completing the circle of 13, a baker, librarian, teacher, mechanic, nurse, grocer, preacher, doctor, banker, mayor, widow, journalist, and detective, each a light extinguished in the name of shadows foreseen by a boy who saw too much. In the aftermath, Raytown lay in ruins, not just physically from the shattered hall and burned church, but spiritually its people hollowed by loss, wandering like ghosts in a town that had devoured itself. Ray Carver was captured days later, cornered in his warehouse lair by a SWAT team following a trail of blood from Sarah's scene. He raved in custody about a boy's voice guiding him, naming victims in dreams that felt like commands, his fractured mind a mirror to Ethan's autism spectrum brilliance. Psychiatrists swarmed, diagnosing Ray with dissociative identity fueled by childhood trauma. Abuse in foster homes during the 1980s, where a crescent moon scar from a belt buckle became his talisman of pain. But Ethan? The boy was evaluated, his predictions chalked up to extraordinary coincidence amplified by savant abilities. Hyper-observant to subtle cues in news broadcasts, overheard conversations and community gossip, his mind weaving them into narratives that synced with Ray's subconscious urges. Yet whispers persisted. Paranormal forums buzzed with theories of psychic linkage, a telepathic bond forged when Ray, as a handyman, had briefly worked at Ethan's school in 1996, their paths crossing in a glance that ignited an unseen connection. Laura Hargrove, shattered by the revelations, fought for her son's normalcy, moving them to a quiet farm outside Kansas City, where Ethan's stars became therapy rather than omens. The case faded into legend, files sealed in Missouri archives, but the questions lingered. Was Ethan a predictor or an unwitting puppeteer? Did his mind summon the darkness or merely reflect it? In the end, justice was a hollow victory. Ray executed in 2005 after appeals dragged through the courts. His last words a murmur of 13 shadows, all gone. This tale of Ethan Hargrove and the 13 deaths that scarred Missouri exposes the human mind as a labyrinth of mirrors, where reflections of evil distort into realities we dare not face. It peels back the layers of sanity, revealing how autism's unique wiring can amplify the world's chaos into clairvoyant echoes, blurring the boundary between neurological gift and supernatural curse. Morality, that fragile construct we cling to, crumbles when confronted with the unpredictable. A mother's love twisted into secrecy, a detective's pursuit ending in her own grave, a killer's madness justified by voices no one else hears. We see our vulnerabilities laid bare, how a child's innocence can become the conduit for society's unraveling, how communities fracture under the weight of unspoken fears, and how evil once invited devours from within. In Ethan's story, we confront the terror that anyone, parent, neighbor, self might harbor shadows capable of summoning slaughter, reminding us that safety is an illusion, justice a delayed echo, and the mind a dark tunnel where truths hide in plain sight. waiting to emerge and mark us forever. As the veil lifts on this psychiatric enigma, rooted in the gritty undercurrents of 1990s America, where monsters walked among us, disguised as drifters and dreamers, we arrive at the precipice of understanding, a place few dare to tread. You've journeyed through the abyss with me, navigating the twists of prediction and peril, emerging not unscathed but enlightened, a testament to your resilience in the face of the inexplicable. Congratulations, you've reached the end, joining an elite cadre of truth-seekers who refuse to avert their gaze from the horror, who stared into the void and let it stare back, forever altered by the revelations unearthed. You're not just a viewer, you're a survivor of this narrative gauntlet, part of a select group that has dared to know the whole unvarnished truth, carrying the weight of 13 shadows as a badge of courage in a world that prefers its darkness buried. Now, in this moment of shared revelation, let's seal our bond. Drop into the comments below and type these exact words. This story shattered my illusions about the human mind. Let it be your declaration, a reflection of the unease stirred within, the lessons etched into your thoughts. By commenting thus, you signal to the most committed followers, those who lurk in the digital shadows hungry for more, that you're one of us, a kindred spirit in the pursuit of hidden truths. Your words will weave you into our growing tapestry, a community of enigma decoders who amplify these stories, challenging the silence that shrouds such cases and building a fortress against the forgotten. Together we illuminate the obscure, turning whispers into roars that demand acknowledgement. But don't stop there. The importance of sharing this video cannot be overstated. Imagine it as a lantern thrust into the pitch-black cellar of collective ignorance, revealing the monsters that thrive in obscurity. By hitting that share button, sending it to friends, posting on forums, embedding in chats, you become the catalyst, ensuring more souls stumble upon what society dares not tell. The fragile divide between mind and madness, the prophetic power lurking in the overlooked. Each share is a ripple in the pond of awareness, growing into waves that crash against the walls of denial, exposing the raw nerves of our shared humanity. Do it now and watch as the light spreads, drawing others into the fold before the darkness claims another untold tale. To anchor yourself deeper in this realm of the sinister and strange, subscribe to the channel. Think of it as forging a key to a forbidden archive, where each notification is a summons to decipher the next enigma, a thread pulling you into a web of the inexplicable that ensnares and enlightens. Without your subscription, you're adrift in the ordinary, vulnerable to the shadows that creep unchecked. With it, you're armored, part of a unique brotherhood and sisterhood that thrives on the thrill of the unknown, unraveling mysteries that chill the spine and quicken the pulse. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and become the guardian of these dark secrets, ensuring the flame of curiosity never flickers out. And remember, the journey doesn't end here. Continue watching our videos, feeding that insatiable hunger for the disturbing and enigmatic, keeping alive the spark that draws you to the edge of reason. Each episode is a step deeper into the tunnel, where what awaits could redefine your perception of reality itself. Stay with us, brave explorer, for the next revelation might just be the one that echoes your own hidden fears. Until then, sleep with one eye open. The shadows are always watching,